Hello, Gold Coasters. I'd like to thank the Gold Coast Libraries for inviting me on to do this virtual author encounter. My name is Bram Connolly. I guess I identify now as a military fiction and non-fiction author, podcast host, and leadership consultant. Entrepreneur, I guess. Previous to that, I was in the Special Forces in the Australian Army for 15 years, 5 years in infantry before that. So I really grew up in the Army. And I decided towards the end of my career, I had this feeling in my gut. I was sort of excited about doing something else with my life. I knew if I'd stayed in the Army, I was probably just going to relive the same year over and over again. So with that in mind, as a major, reasonably successful, the world sort of at my feet, I left the ADF and became an author. And here I am today. Today I'm going to be talking to you about my new book, The Commando Way. And initially this book was going to be called The Risk of Being Average. And the reason for that is I felt like I was just an average guy with sort of average intelligence and average looks and average athletic ability. And as I was starting to write my memoirs and my leadership journey, I realised I had done all these fairly extreme, amazing things. And I thought, how's an average guy doing that? Then I realised that inside Special Forces we have certain structures, certain disciplines, a way of doing business. It's the Commando Way, I guess. It was the easiest way for me to understand how to say that and how to get that across to the audience. And so this book really is an amalgamation of all of those sort of habits, those tasks that we would do, those habits, those behaviours, those attitudes. And then I just used my life experiences to explain it. It turned out that perhaps I wasn't that average after all. I suppose one of the questions that I was able to answer by writing The Commando Way is, how does someone achieve something like this? The Sherwood Green Beret. What are those experiences and those profound moments that allow someone to actually excel and exceed during a selection course, and how do they come out the other side of it? And I think one of the key areas for me of the book is frames of reference. So being able to build a frame of reference of something really difficult, something really hard, so that when you do come across these other challenges in your life, then things don't seem so difficult or so hard. My example is, the Commando Selection and Training course that I did in 1997 is to this day still one of the hardest things I've ever done, if not the hardest. And yet in Afghanistan in 2010, there was any number of things that were really difficult, both emotionally and physically, that I had to deal with. But I had this frame of reference, and the frame of reference was that selection course. That was harder. Actually, writing this book was quite hard too. And there were nights when I would sit there going, I just cannot put another word together in a sentence. And then I would think back to things that I've done that were harder in the past, and it didn't seem so bad. One of the other areas of this book that I think is quite powerful for readers is how to treat boredom as an opportunity. And I'd like to share that with you now by reading that. A generation that cannot endure boredom will be a generation of little men, in whom every vital impulse slowly withers as though they were cut flowers in a vase. That's Bertrand Russell. I experienced countless hours of boredom in my army life. Sometimes it was as arduous or so arduous that I contemplated discharge. However, somewhere along the way, I learned that being bored can be an advantage. Boredom can in fact be a powerful tool that sparks creativity, wonderment, and inspiration. It can help us develop amazing ideas and even solve some of the world's and our own deepest problems. It might sound strange, but some of my most vivid memories of my time in the Army and Special Forces are of being on sentry duty, or picket as we called it. I did such incredible things, so why is it that I can remember in amazing detail benign events like lying on sodden earth in a rain-swept jungle while training in far north Queensland, or the instant the wind changed from hot to cold while I was still sitting on top of an armoured vehicle in Somalia. Only moments before, I'd been bored out of my mind, just staring out into the desert, and now I could remember that memory forever. I remember the terror I felt at night in Afghanistan, shivering up on a rocky escarpment while my men slept in a small ravine behind me. I peered out into the darkness, searching for an enemy who knew only too well how to blend into the rocks. Far down in the valley below, artillery and fast jets hammered at an enemy position, while the US Special Forces escaped an ambush that had been set for them. A drone circled overhead, silent in the darkness. I watched it all unfold, and when it had finished, I looked up to the stars and my thoughts drifted to the time at school when I'd fought with a bigger kid who had my measure. Every soldier has had to pull a sentry duty at some time in their career, either alone or with someone else. You sit there and listen and watch for the enemy while the rest of your team sleeps or carries out work behind you, usually out of earshot. The effort of staying awake can be exhausting. Filling our every waking moment with stimulus, as most of us do these days, is really a very new thing. Some sentry duties I've done were just 25 minutes, others in excess of 3 hours, but the ones I remember most vividly are solo duties by night in the era before we had night vision goggles. I didn't want them to end. Here's the thing. When you're sitting there bored, you slowly become one with the environment. You tune into your surroundings, becoming a silent voyeur of everything that's going on around you, the flora, the fauna, the weather. All these things become existential, in that their existence explains itself to you. As a young soldier, I had one sentry duty somewhere in the high range training area in Queensland. I was alone, sitting in the heat of the day on a rock, trying not to fall asleep, but my eyelids had other ideas. The exercise wasn't contested, so I knew there was no enemy out there, and it's really hard to stay motivated when there's no enemy. I was daydreaming about all manner of things. Normal stuff, girls, motorbikes, girls, triathlon, girls, and my future. Normal soldier stuff. When I felt a weight on my knees. Slowly I looked down and saw a king brown snake casually sliding across my outstretched legs. Ugh. He looked up at me and then back in the direction he was going. It was like waiting for a giant cargo train to pass. The carriages just kept on coming, and I estimated that it was almost 3 meters in length. I was surprised at how calm I was. There was no fight or flight, so the adrenaline never kicked in. He slid away slowly in the direction of my platoon, a few hundred meters away, down in the gorge. I continued my sentry duty, contemplating nature and the profound experience I just had with this reptile, which could have easily ended my life. That was until I heard screams below me and saw people running everywhere. Perhaps my platoon had just seen a snake. I didn't know it back then, but I was actually building a skill. I was learning to be bored. I was discovering the power of mindfulness, of keeping your attention in the moment, which is a building block of emotional intelligence, and perhaps even a precursor to enlightenment. Mindfulness is the art of projecting your thoughts and imagining outcomes, training your brain to make informed decisions, and mentally exploring plans to discover their second and third order effects. In Boredom, I discovered a form of meditation that allowed me to develop my subconscious along with my conscious mind. And when I say I discovered the power of boredom, what I really mean to say is I stumbled upon it. Let's face it, thinkers have done this for millennia. Philosophers, scientists, mathematicians, psychologists, writers, and others have sat and been bored, giving their minds the space to think deeply about things. Having spent all that time on the picket, I can now just sit mindfully with little effort. The beautiful thing is that it's not a difficult skill to learn. You just need to let yourself be bored occasionally. You can train yourself to work through it and not need the constant stimulation of society or distraction so prevalent in the world today. If you give yourself the space to try, you can become someone who thinks deeply, reflects, ponders, and imagines things. Ideally, find somewhere in nature, somewhere quiet and hidden, away. Leave your distractions at home. Your mind needs to be observant of the benign things surrounding you. And just look around. Be observant. Ask yourself questions about things. If you see an ant, think about how fast it's moving relative to its size. The patterns in the leaves and the tree bark. Why are they like that? Why do clouds look the way they do? And how do they form? Observe everything and talk to yourself in your mind. Then, half an hour later, unpack an idea. You can use your watch. Trust me, soldiers on picket check their watches every couple of minutes too. Contemplate something deeper. Think about religion, creation, your life, your future, and your past. Just let your thoughts wander. Come up with some hypothesis that explains what you've been thinking about, or an action plan to implement. You can train your mind in this way in your daily life too. If you can't remember something, a singer's name, a book title, anything really, don't immediately reach for Google. Allow your mind to ponder the matter and come back to it later. You knew the answer before, it's still up there. Allowing your mind to work the question out itself will bolster its abilities for the future. If you can do this regularly, you'll find that decisions you make will be better informed. You'll solve problems naturally rather than react to issues. And in this way, you'll realise more of your own potential. And all this comes from being comfortable being bored. Just a few lessons from that. Don't look at being bored as time you've lost. It's actually time gained. Having this time to yourself can be a form of meditation that brings great benefits. Being bored allows you to tune into your environment, appreciate the sight, sounds, tastes, smells and feelings around you. For me, this is the perfect time to think. Allow your mind to come up with whatever random thoughts and ideas it wants. Future plans, jobs that need doing, concepts to explore. Reminisce about good times. Reinforce those neural pathways. Whenever and wherever you find the time and space for mindful boredom, don't avoid it or waste it. Embrace it as an opportunity for creativity and growth. As you can see, this book isn't all gung-ho, all guns blazing, things that I did that were exciting, jumping off cliffs, diving, going through ambushes. It's not all about that. Some of it is about mindfulness, resilience, mental toughness, and leadership. Okay, I have a few questions that have been sent to me by Gold Coast libraries, and I'm going to pick a few random ones and just answer them as we go. What did you most enjoy about writing this particular book? What did I most enjoy about writing this particular book? Well, I felt like it was a journey of self-discovery in some ways. After my tours to Afghanistan, I think one thing that I came back with was a realization that perhaps all there is to the secret of life is just self-development, just making ourselves better versions of ourselves continually. And I feel like this book for me was a way to actually share those experiences of self-development with everyone else. And in that way, it was quite cathartic for myself. And also, it's a memoir to my two young sons, Matthew and Andrew, and they can see how I've developed as a person and as a man, and why I do the things that I do from a leadership, resilience, and optimization standpoint. Another question is, what advice do you have for budding writers? So, first and foremost, write, and write every day, and write a lot. And secondly, get mentors, reach out to mentors, send people things. Thirdly, read a lot. Read the type of work that you want to write. I don't read while I'm writing because I tend to be too swayed by it, but I do read a lot when I'm not writing. And the last point is probably On Writing by Stephen King, I think is one of the best books around how to actually learn the craft. One of the things that stuck in my mind for my first two books, The Fighting Season and Off Reservation, was to show, don't tell. And I think that can be very powerful when it's used with prose, and you can actually show someone a scenario without telling them what's happening. You're showing through the actions of the protagonist, and you're showing them through the actions of the scenery and the setting and everything going on, rather than saying this happened this way. Things I get asked about a lot is resilience. And I think it's easiest to explain resilience as a top of a pyramid with a foundation being two parts or two pillars. One of those pillars is fitness and the other pillar is the mental toughness, and then you've got the resilience at the top. So resilience is what you bring to the party right now. Resilience really is in your DNA. It's genetic in some parts. So depending on how tough a life people in your history and your family line have had will epigenetically change or genetically change your resilience. So in some part, a little bit of your resilience is predetermined. But it is what you bring to the party right now. So some of it is DNA, and some of it is how much sleep you had the night before. You would know if you've had less sleep, you're a little bit more fragile than if you've had a great night's sleep. Also in your diet, in the sort of food, if you're eating a lot of high fatty foods and drinking a lot of caffeine, then you are a little bit more skittish, so you're less resilient in that regard as well. So diet, sleep, and what you bring to the party from a genetic standpoint is your resilience. But the good thing about that is that you can be either really resilient or not so resilient, but if you're fit, then that foundation is laid. So fit from a metabolic standpoint, and I go through this in the book as well. If you're doing metabolic conditioning, if you're doing weights and the like, if you're really honing your body so that you are, ready to take on any of the day's challenges, then you could be called fit. Fit for what? Fit for golf, fit for swimming, fit for triathlon. You name it, it can be specific or it can be broader. Something like CrossFit gives you a broader general fitness. And then you have mental toughness. Now, as I said before, mental toughness really is developed through frames of reference. So having something really difficult at this point in your life that you can look back on and go, that was tough. This is not so tough. And then what we do is if we want to get tougher, well then with our mental toughness, we find new frames of reference, or we build new frames of reference. So we go out and do really arduous activities. We take on things that we know are going to scare us, we know is going to be difficult. And that allows us to be more mentally tough into the future. One of the things I will say that I also get asked about a lot around leadership and the like is around, the secret to leadership. It's such an interesting question because it is based on learning about people, caring about people, empathy, having a connectedness with people. You're asking people to do what you want them to do because they want to do it. And at the most fundamental level, when we're talking about leadership, we're actually talking about holding someone else's attention. So if you imagine that attention is the scarcest resource in the world, it's the thing that is the hardest to actually find, someone else's attention, and then hold it. When you have people who are working for you, when you're a team leader or a leader of any sort, and you have fans or subordinates or whatever, the thing you really want to be able to keep is their attention. Because when you can keep someone's attention, then you're generally communicating with them around something that they find interesting. So if you're a leader and you're moving along your leadership journey and you have people who work for you and you want to get them to do something that you want them to do because they want to do it, you have to learn about them, learn what holds their attention. It could be their family, it could be golf, it could be fishing, camping, it might actually be numbers, accounting, powerlifting, it could be anything. And then you have to have enough benevolent manipulation of yourself to meet them in the moment where they are and talk to that thing that holds their attention so that you can then get them to do a job that you want them to do. It's difficult, it's not easy. And some people will put walls up and you just got to keep going and going and going and break it down over time and building those relationships. So there is a secret to leadership. It's holding someone's attention. The problem is the secret's really difficult to actually maintain or to pursue. Look, I'm Bram Connolly. The things that I'm passionate about is my podcast, the Warrior You podcast. I'm hoping to write a third Matt Ricks book so I can complete a trilogy. I'd dearly love one day for them to be turned into a movie or a teleseries, preferably before I die so I can see it happen. And my business is Hindsight, Leadership and Resilience, where we go into businesses and we help them with building capacity from a leadership standpoint, making people better leaders than what they were yesterday. I want to thank the Gold Coast Libraries. Thanks very much for me holding your attention, I hope, and I do hope that you enjoy reading The Commando Way. Thank you.